Welcome everyone to this World Toad Association webinar. The topic for the discussion that we're about to have is racing rules and regulation and the impact on betting. I'm joined by two excellent speakers, Craig Fravel from the Stronach Group and Peter Johansson from ATF. And I'll give you a little more detail about Craig and Peter in a few moments. But to get things underway, it's probably appropriate that I say a little bit about my role in this discussion as the moderator. My name's Andrew Harding. I'm the Executive Director of the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Coincidentally, in terms of the title, different role, same title, the Executive Director of the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities. And as you will all understand, the IFHA, as the world leader for thoroughbred racing internationally, has a very wide remit, and that remit's expanding. It has historically extended from black type quality control, the Longines World's Best Racehorse Rankings, Best Races, Best Jockeys, Award of Merit, to the health, welfare and safety of jockeys, to the international movement of horses, and amongst other things in terms of an expanding remit. More recently, a focus on sustainability, and indeed the IFHA has just completed the work on a new strategic plan, which sets out its work program across all of those areas. But germane to our discussion in this webinar, the regulation of racing has always been core to the function of the IFHA. Now, when I say that, you will appreciate that the IFHA is not itself a regulator. We're not a world body in the sense of FINA or FIFA or the International Olympic Committee. We don't, as an international federation, stage events. But historically, the IFHA has played a very influential role in the advancement of the state of regulation for thoroughbred racing. That more recently has seen significant advances made in a number of areas. I'm just going to touch on those very briefly. Integrity. Integrity plainly rests in major part on a strong regulatory approach. And so far as the regulation of racing to ensure integrity, the goal is clear. The goal is to provide a level playing field, because it is a level playing field that is the sine qua non for public confidence in racing, and public confidence is required in order for betting to take place in substantial volume. And in achieving confidence in a level playing field, an essential element is drug-free racing, anti-doping controls. And the International Agreement of Breeding, Racing and Wagering, which is authored by the International Federation, has always been seen as the essential building block for the approach that's now taken essentially across the world in terms of the approach to medication in racing. And over the last 10 years, the International Agreement, Article 6 in particular, has been expanded with a very strong statement and a set of model rules in relation to major doping agents. Another aspect of integrity has been the IFHA's move to establish the reference laboratory program. And the concept here has been to ensure that there's a set of laboratories across the world that have the demonstrated proficiency in order to provide the testing that supports those races that make up the Longines World's Best Races and produce the horses that are seen as the Longines World's Best ranked horses. That program is now well advanced. There are now 6 laboratories. There are IFHA reference laboratories, and this will be an area of continuing focus for the IFHA. Another area that is important to note has been the IFHA's work in relation to gene doping. I really think it can be fairly said that the IFHA is ahead of the curve so far as this issue is concerned. Steps were taken some years ago to establish an expert technical group that now includes participation from the World Anti-Doping Authority and a set of cogent, robust regulations are being formulated with a view to ensuring that this threat of the future is something that the industry is prepared to deal with. Turning to another area that has historically been important to the Federation, and one in which there's been a great deal of progress made, there is the harmonisation of race day rules, another important aspect of regulation. One need look no further than that fundamental rule of racing, the protest objection rule, to see the indeed crucial role that the IFHA has played in achieving a greater harmonisation of the approaches taken to this important area of the conduct of a race in terms of the Category 1 rule. Now, it's not universal yet, may never be, but it has certainly been taken up in a growing number of jurisdictions. It's essentially the rule in Japan, Hong Kong, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, France, UK, Ireland. And I know that there's consideration at least being given to it in the US. Now, why is this important? Let us go back to the purpose of today's webinar, or this webinar. It's to look to regulation through the prism of its impact on betting. And certainly, commingling is an increasingly important part of the commercial strategy of racing globally, international commingling, and self-evidently, an approach that's common across the world so far as something as fundamental as how to deal with a protest objection in a race is a good platform upon which to encourage an international audience to engage in racing through international commingling. The other area that I wanted to touch on briefly is that of horse welfare, minimum welfare standards. The IFHA sees it as crucial that racing present its very good story in relation to welfare in a comprehensible, cogent fashion. So the work was undertaken to produce these minimum standards and to promulgate them through the international agreement and through the IFHA's website. But there is more work to be done, and this is an important area of focus of one of the standing committees of the IFHA, the Horse Welfare Committee. With those few remarks, what I'd now like to do is to introduce our two speakers. The first is Craig Frevell. Craig spent some 6 years as the president of Breeders' Cup, but today is the Stronach Group Chief Executive Officer for Racing Operations, where he has management and oversight of all racing operations across the Stronach Group, own tracks and training facilities. His focus includes the implementation and enforcement of global best practices and integrity standards for horse and rider safety in collaboration with key industry stakeholders, while driving a new standard of excellence in thoroughbred horse racing. And if I can go off script for a moment, it is notable that in terms of Craig's CV, that during his period at Breeders' Cup and since then, it has always been a very progressive organisation in terms of advancing the cause for integrity and welfare in thoroughbred racing. And so he is eminently qualified to to serve in the capacity that he does with the Stronach Group. Peter is currently the manager of betting objects at ATG, the Swedish tote operator. He was previously director of racing at the Swedish Trotting Association, and in that position was a member of the management team at ATG. So I'd now like to ask Craig to provide his remarks, following which Peter has some material that he's going to share with us. And then after each of Craig and Peter have concluded their remarks, there'll be the opportunity for questions and answers. Now, if you would like to post those questions now, please feel free to do so, but we'll engage in the question and answer session after each of our two speakers have concluded the comments that they wish to make. So over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. For those of you who are unaware, it is 3 a.m. here in San Diego, California. So if I am sounding confused or groggy, instead of attributing that to old age, I hope you'll write it off to me having woken up and gotten my dog up with me to attend this webinar. I did not prepare a PowerPoint for you guys. I know so many of us have been on multiple Zoom calls over the last several years, and PowerPoints are usually a large part of those. So I decided to dispense with that and just kind of go through a bit of history with you, some perspectives, and some commentary, and then we'll move on to Peter and then any questions you may have. But as Andrew noted, I was for 8 years the CEO of the Breeders' Cup. I left there in 2019 to return to California on a full-time basis. But having had the opportunity to be at the Breeders' Cup, I think I had, along with Andrew and other members of the IFHA board and representatives, the unique opportunity to see racing around the world, to see where we do things well, and to see also where there are areas where we are lacking, either individually or collectively. And learn from the example of others, and I'll be straightforward. Until I took the Breeders' Cup job, my exposure to international racing, and particularly in Europe, was much more limited. But in the job as CEO of the Breeders' Cup, I was on at least a monthly trek to somewhere around the world to attend the world's great races, and as an American with a federal and state type of government, where each individual state governs its own racing, compared to the way racing is governed around the world with much more centralized governing bodies, it became more and more and abundantly clear that we had a lot of work to do within the US to get ourselves up to a better standard, both from a medication standpoint, as Andrew pointed out, the objective, hopefully someday, of drug-free racing, but also from the welfare standpoint, and for how we treat our not only our animals, but our human participants, as well as the racing fans who are involved in this business. When I began at the Breeders' Cup, I think almost the very first meeting I went to, there was a massive insurrection, I guess would be one word, that attempted to implement immediately a ban on Lasix furosemide in the races, in the Breeders' Cup races themselves, which I undertook as a project immediately, and we managed within the first year following that to conduct the Breeders' Cup in California, at which time the 2-year-old races were conducted without the use of furosemide. The objective being to extend that ban for the Breeders' Cup at least in following years. And unfortunately, after 2 years of doing that, we ran into serious opposition from horsemen's groups around the country, even threatening to exercise rights that they have under the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And we were then forced to abandon that effort within another year. And so the Breeders' Cup for a few years following that was forced to conduct its races with the use of furosemide on race day. Fast forward a bit to 2019, and we had in California, although I was not here at the time, all of us experienced a dramatic increase in a particular time frame, mainly from January through the end of March, in catastrophic injuries experienced at Santa Anita Park. Now, the dirty truth of that experience was that in this country, at least, it was not that unusual. The numbers, and I believe we just had a report issued the other day that there were a total of 42 deaths from racing and training recorded at Santa Anita in 2019 for that particular year. And that, while it sounds like a huge number, if you went back historically for prior years, that was actually not that unusual. But the main difference was that for a variety of reasons, the popular media and social media and others, for the first time in Los Angeles at least, took notice of those numbers and began publishing them, began countdowns, and so it got to the point where the New York Times was doing exposés on catastrophic horse injuries in the United States and particularly in California. And the impact of that was, in addition to huge regulatory oversight and concern and threats from both local and federal government to shut racing down in its entirety, calls from the animal activist community, all of which required immediate and aggressive action, which my boss, now Belinda Stronach, undertook, along with the horsemen in California, to implement dramatic reforms in the way racing was conducted. One of those, which was more of an integrity issue, not necessarily a safety issue, was moving towards the ultimate elimination of race day medication in the form of Lasix, and shortly thereafter, 2-year-old racing and then stakes races were included in the ban on race day medication. Fortunately, thanks to a coalition of which I was a part as in my role as CEO of the Breeders' Cup, we managed to collect a number of other racetracks around the country, the New York Racing Association, Churchill Downs, Keeneland, the tracks in Maryland, and a number of others, Gulfstream Park in Florida, all the Stronach tracks, all the Churchill Downs tracks, to implement the same ban on race day medication in 2-year-old races and then stakes races, I believe, beginning in 2021. So that was certainly a step forward, but probably many of the more important outcomes of the experience at Santa Anita were the implementation of significant track safety reforms, a focus obviously on track surface, which I would say was not a neglected issue. Every track in our country, I think, spends enormous amounts of time and effort trying to make their racing surface as safe as possible, but really requiring much more in-depth examination of horses, both pre-race and pre-work, constant monitoring of horses on the racetrack to identify those that might be at risk, the development of much better practices with respect to horses getting on and off the veterinarian's list, restrictions on medication during training, particularly a new focus on the use of butazolidine, both for racing and training, and perhaps something unique to this country, what's called the voided claim rule. As you know, claiming races have been a staple of American racing, whether some of us like that or not, for many, many years. And the practice of disguising injuries through medication for sort of latent injuries through the use of bute close to a training or racing event. I think it gotten out of hand. In California, probably 15 years ago, we had introduced what's called a voided claim rule, which in the event that a horse is injured during a race, any claim in for that horse is voided. So the risk shifting element of a claiming race is modified by use of that voided claiming rule. That rule became much stronger. It began to develop an impetus for implementation in other states around the country. And we now have, which I'll go into in a minute, an entirely new statutory scheme for federal regulation of horse racing from an integrity and safety standpoint. So back to the issue at hand, the impact on the economics of the game in terms of the kinds of things that we experienced here in California. But before I say that, I will also point out that at least from the standpoint of safety, and I think perception, we have been enormously successful in what we've done. The most recently completed Santa Anita meet, which just ended on Sunday of this year, of this past week, we've experienced a total of 9 catastrophic injuries. One of those, I will tell you, could have been avoided had the owner elected to allow us to conduct some surgery called arthrodesis, which has also been developed to address fetlock injuries, which have always previously been thought to be almost automatically a candidate for euthanasia. We have managed to, along with Dr. Ryan Carpenter and a few other prominent orthopedic surgeons in this country, develop techniques to save horses that 5 years ago would certainly have been put down. And that's been a huge positive for us and for those of us who really do care about these animals. I think a positive as well for the horses. And to address critics, these horses are 80% pasture sound. Obviously, there are some horses, anytime you have surgical outcomes that don't do well from either anesthesia recovery or laminitis developing. So it's certainly not 100% guarantee, but it's a huge step in a positive direction. We also implemented new imaging technologies at Santa Anita. Our positron emission tomography machine, standing machine, was the first introduced at a racing facility in the world. That's accompanied by state-of-the-art MRI, standing MRI machine at Santa Anita, as well as a nuclear scintigraphy unit, which makes Santa Anita Park itself one of the most advanced radiographic and imaging centers in the entire world. And the veterinarians, trainers, and owners at Santa Anita have reacted enormously positive to those technologies, utilizing them and taking great advantage of it. And there's been a lot of great research, some of which was reported on yesterday at the Health and Safety Summit, Welfare Summit in Kentucky, which hopefully at some point down the road will allow us to much more rapidly identify at-risk horses and screen those who might be at risk and hopefully turn them out rather than race them past the point of safety. But the one thing I was going to say also in terms of the wagering public, I hate to sound trite, I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but what happened at Santa Anita in 2019, and particularly the media reaction to it, was a massive impact on the brand of Santa Anita. You know, this is one of the iconic racetracks in the world. For those of you who haven't been there, you know, and I've been to, I think, most every great racetrack in the world. It is a truly stunning place. It belongs to be an icon, as an iconic racetrack, because it really is spectacular at the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains, and it's just got a great history, and you know, previously had a great brand, but But I will tell you that the negative publicity and along with the Breeders' Cup, along with the other racetracks I mentioned, did a good deal of brand research, consumer research to identify what the public reaction to our sport was as a result of the catastrophic injury situation that was publicized at Santa Anita. And again, the same problems were going on elsewhere. They just weren't getting the same, at least at that point in time. They were shortly thereafter, but weren't getting the same kind of media attention that the situation in California was. But I think, you know, a very notable impact was, in addition to the political threat and the animal rights activists and protests and constant barrage of misinformation a lot of times, there was a notable decline in the quality of that brand. We have, you know, to be honest with you, we're still recovering at Santa Anita from the perception problems that were created by that particular level of scrutiny. Our handle, our wagering turnover, as many of you would refer to it, was down, you know, 25% on a race by race basis in 2019 and 20. Now, a lot of this you have to, you know, it's almost impossible to filter out the impact of COVID and you know, COVID shutdowns and racing without on-track fans. And so to accurately measure the impact of those integrity issues and those catastrophic injury issues is almost impossible. But I can tell you, just as a gut feeling and a generalized perception, the impact on the brand was dramatic. And you can still see it. Now, this has always been the case to some extent. I had the privilege of running the racetrack here in Del Mar, California for 21 years. By contrast, Del Mar's brand was not nearly so dramatically impacted. And over the last couple of years, you know, they haven't had the same hill to climb. And so the same group of horses, the same jockeys, trainers, others will leave Santa Anita over the coming 2 weeks. Del Mar will open on July 20th, and there'll probably be a 20% boost in wagering turnover at Del Mar. And I think that's largely attributable to the differential in brand and then the ongoing hangover from those issues. Now, when I was at Del Mar, to be straightforward, we had a number of summers where the catastrophic injury rate was, in fact, when I was at the Breeders' Cup and we were going to Del Mar in 2017, they had a really difficult year in 2016. So none of us has been immune from it. But if you will, again, to point out the positives, nationally speaking, every year since the beginning of the National Injury Database that we have here in this country, managed by the Jockey Club, the overall rate of injury has declined by percentage points, and this past year reached the lowest level it's ever been, I think at 1.33 per thousand. And you know, I hesitate to compare to other jurisdictions because I think everybody has a little different methodology about how they count those things. Some count only those injuries that take place and are euthanized on the racetrack. Others, our database, anything 72 hours post-race is included in the database. So it's very hard to compare what might be happening here with Ireland or the UK without a little bit more in-depth. But nonetheless, I think all of us have to be well aware of the impact on the brand and what that has in terms of the impact that has in terms of the general public wagering on races. Now I'm going to say something that I think is maybe a little controversial, but I think in terms of the sort of core betting public, the issue of animal welfare and injury, while disappointing, and for those who are true fans, you know, something that that they're obviously empathetic about. But in terms of the core wagering element, I would say that that hasn't had a particularly big impact. You know, we're still seeing, you know, huge growth in our computer-assisted wagering. Those that are in it from a sort of financial and analytical standpoint, whether the brand of Santa Anita is impacted by, you know, animal welfare issues, I don't think is a big concern. Their concerns are field size, the competitiveness of races, the pools, and whether there's sufficient liquidity for their wagering processes to take place in ways that are profitable to them. Now, that's not to say that those issues, they have so many downstream impacts that obviously we have to be vigilant about things such as, and I think, you know, one of the things that's probably been the most difficult is on horse ownership and the marketplace for horses. The foal crop in this country since 2007 has declined from, I believe, a high of around 46,000 to it'll be around 19,000 in the current year. So a more than 50% decline in the foal crop also translates into dramatically lower amounts of horses, and the thing that does drive wagering in this country, at least, is field size and the quality of our racing. And you may have noticed, this is not to pick on my friends at the New York Racing Association, but on Belmont Stakes Day, which is obviously a nationally televised event, some of and again, there are a lot of other reasons for this, including superstar horses that people were trying to avoid, but I believe there were 4 or 5 Grade 1 stakes that had 5 horses in them on Belmont Stakes Day, which is, you know, again, no fault of NYRA's, no criticism of them for the racing program they put on, but a reflection of our current situation with foal crops and the interest of owners in our sport. And I think that is directly impacted by perceptions of integrity, as well as the issue of catastrophic injury. And, you know, as we all know, it's a tough sport. It's a very difficult proposition, perhaps everywhere but Hong Kong, to be an owner and to experience the kind of inventory turnover, if you will, that we regularly do in our business. Now, what's the good news? As I said earlier, the good news is both on a national basis and particularly here in California, the rate of serious injury has declined dramatically. Even the newspapers that used to jump all over us have been reporting that faithfully and accurately, which is encouraging. But also on a national basis, July 1 marks the effective date of the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act, which a number of us started working on probably, I think around my second year at the Breeders' Cup. We began the process of introducing federal legislation to harmonize rules around the United States. One objective, although it wasn't in the early drafts of the bill, was ultimately the elimination of race day medication, but also much greater emphasis on addressing things like corticosteroids, steroids themselves, any kind of anabolic activity, gene doping, you name it. And so right at the end of the Trump administration, thanks to the efforts of Representative Andy Barr and Paul Tonko, as well as Senator Mitch McConnell, a bill was passed and signed by the president to implement the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. And on July 1, that will go into effect. Tracks, trainers, horsemen, backstretch personnel around the country are busy signing up, registering as covered persons under that act, and horses are being processed into the systems. On July 1, a new set of regulations that were drafted by one of the subcommittees of HISA, which addresses in particular track safety practices and standards. And those regulations, which were really modeled very much on the reforms that we implemented here in California, including, as we discussed on our previous call, new whip rules, riding crop rules, which limit the number of strikes in a race to 6 or fewer, with I believe it's 2 strikes permitted, and with a pause required to allow the horse time to respond. Again, avoided claiming rule that will have a national impact rather than just local, and a variety of other safety initiatives based, again, on reforms that were implemented here in Southern California over the last 3 years. We just finished at least a number of racetracks that I've been working with, responding to the current draft of the medication regulations that are being promulgated by HISA. Those should be coming out for more formal public notice and comment, and presented to the Federal Trade Commission in the next few months for implementation. And for those of you who are more familiar with the IFHA rules, I think what you will find is that the United States will be much closer to full harmony with IFHA medication rules. The one thing we haven't seen yet are testing thresholds and reporting thresholds and the like, but we certainly expect that those will look very familiar to many of us who've been involved in international racing for a long time. I know it's a big issue internationally, but the ban on 2-year-olds racing on Lasix will be continued and implemented nationally, and the ban on stakes horses racing with race day medication will also be implemented. Unfortunately, we won't be at the 5-day limit on Butte. I don't believe. We haven't seen those final regulations yet. Some of us would love to see us get there, but there will still be significant restrictions on Butte, both in racing and training, importantly, so that a at-risk horse won't be out doing a significant workout. And so we expect the national medication rules to be implemented within the next 6 months, I would say. So I personally find, now, is this going to be the panacea that, or the solution to all our problems from economic issue? Will this drive wagering interest and public interest in the sport? I would suggest that it's a step in the right direction. Again, I think perhaps the most profound part of it, assuming we get it right, and it's going to, there's going to be a lot of hiccups along the way and a lot of criticism and people who don't think it's implemented correctly or quickly or however that needs to be done. But I think hopefully the positive will be in the market for horses, that we can stop discouraging owners from being involved in this business by having loose medication regulations, by the perception that the playing field's not level, that certain trainers have some magic solution that they're using to gain advantage. Again, if we can get to the point where people have confidence, I believe the impact on the breeding product, the overall quality will improve. But again, that all remains to be seen. That's going to be a long, hard uphill battle. So Andrew, I think I'll leave the rest of this, any questions that we might have as follow-up. I think that's kind of a state of the situation here in the United States for now at 3 a.m.
Thank you, Craig. That was fascinating. Thank you so much. I'm sure everyone gained a lot from what you've shared with us. Can I ask you now, Peter, to share what you had, so that we can see some part of Europe, at least, a perspective, and then we can proceed to the Q&A.
Sure. Let's see there. Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Craig, for a very interesting summary of the situation in the US. It's it's nice to see that you're working hard with the horse welfare and integrity projects. First of all, you can say that I'm going to talk throughout our customers' point of view. So this is ATG's betting customers that have answered a lot of questions and surveys. In Sweden and in the Nordic countries, first of all, we have focused for the moment on the excessive use of the whip or the hard use of the whip in racing. So we have a little different focus for the moment compared to all over the world, but that's the main part for the moment. And I'm going to talk about that. And first of all, I can just mention how the regulation are in the sport in Sweden. In the thoroughbred or the Swedish gallop, they have banned using the whip. So they are not allowed to use the whip in the races anymore, more to have the whip with them and use it if they are try to avoid an accident. So no hits or no touches in the races, only for safety, you can say. In the Swedish trotting, it's a little bit different, but the regulation is pretty hard. You're not allowed to hit the horse with a whip. You only can use the whip for communicate with the horse or correct the horse and flick the horse. So it's a little different compared to a lot of the countries, but the regulations in Sweden for 2022 is really strict, you can say, and have gone every year. We have gone one step further. So that's the state for the moment. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about CSR and horse welfare from the ATG customers' point of view. So we have done, for a year ago, we did an online survey. So we asked our customers regarding the corporate social responsibility matters, what's important for them. And there was 837 customers that answered. And as you see in the darker blue is 2019 and the lighter blue is 2021. And all CSR matters have been rising compared to 2019. So it's getting more and more important for our customers that we are, sustainability, and we have CSR in our focus. And the ones that stands out or is the highest one is promote horse welfare and prevent doping and race fixing or match fixing them. And you can see that, they are always in the top or the most important ones for our customers. The second survey and the one that are going to have the most focus on for the moment, it's a survey about horse welfare. And we talked to 1,450 of our customers. And it's really important that the customers here are watching national and international races on ATG Live. That's our broadcast, or on atg.se, our webpage. So they have been watching both national and international races. And we ask our customers what they think is important to them when they place a bet at ATG. As you see, after famous riders and horses and good broadcasts, the horses are treating well is the stack third from left. And the one you can say that stands out for me is that they take that the horses are treating well comes before exciting or fun. And we hope all our bettors or punters or handlers think that is betting on horse racing is fun and exciting, but they put the horse are treating well before that. And we talked with the customers as well and asked them the question, in the past year, have you noticed cases where horses are being badly treated within the framework of the competition that ATG offered bets on, large on? And as you see, 52% says no, and 48% say don't know or yes, and The 30% that says yes, we ask them, okay, what incident have you seen or noticed in the races? And as you see here, that stands out in Swedish. This is our customers, ATG customers, so it's Swedish customers, but they have seen national and international races. So 91% says of these 30% that too hard or too frequent use of the whip is the most common one that they take as the incident they have noticed. And we go further then to potential customers and game refrainment. And have you actually actively chosen to refrain from betting on races from a specific country because you feel that the horses are being badly treated? And as you see, 24% or almost 1/4 of the respondents actively chosen to refrain from betting on races from a specific country because horses have been treated badly, or they think they have been treated badly, so that's their opinion in it. And it's really important here that all countries lose customers because of how the horses are being treated. So Sweden, we lose customers, and all other countries as well. So the only thing we can say that we see that countries with less strict regulations have a greater drop compared to the ones that have stricter rules, and this is mainly regarding the use of the whip from our customers' point of view. To sum it up then, a short summary here. According to ATG customers, horse welfare is one of the most important aspects of betting on horse racing. 30% of all of the respondents have noticed cases where horses have been badly treated during the last year. Most incidents are connecting to the excessive or hard use of the whip. As I said before, the focus in the Nordic countries and especially Sweden have been a lot on how we use the whip the last 10 years, you can say. And 1/4 or 24% then of the respondent activity refrain from betting on races from a specific country because horses have been treated badly. And horse welfare has a large effect on potential customers. The countries with most remarked incident are the ones affected the most. So this is really important to say that you can be best in the class, but still you're going to lose customers if you don't take care and follow the, you can say, the customers well, or the social will. Existing customers, horse welfare is one of the most important aspects according to ATG customers when they consider gambling on horses. And this is customers that still in our pool, you can say. They are watching national and international races, they're betting daily or weekly on horse racing, and still they're saying, okay, if you're going to stay here, you have to take care of the horse welfare. The aspect is so high up on their agenda. Potential customers, improving horse welfare should have a positive effect on the number of customers. We see that a lot of, especially the young people, they are really on top of the CSR and horse welfare. So if they're going to place a bet, they are really keen of knowing if the horses are being treated well or not. So if we're going to have a younger crowd, we have to take care of the horse welfare as well. And least but not least, or the potential customers loss, if we don't adapt to our customers and society expectations, we're gonna lose customers over short term and long term. So it's really important to listen to them and take care of the questions. So if we ensure good horse welfare, that gives us social license to operate and secure a bright future for horse racing and betting. This is really, really important for ATG and for our customers to take care of both the horse racing as well and the betting. And last but not least, thank you for all listening. I'm glad to take some question. And in Sweden, we say glad midsommar because it's Midsummer Eve tomorrow. So we're going to enjoy the Swedish summer and eating and drinking well with our family and friends. So thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Peter. That was excellent. That looks like a very happy scene. Glad midsummer. But you're not allowed to go and get ready for that yet because you've got a bit more work to do. We've got an audience here that want to ask some questions. We have one already, I think, that's come in. It's a question to Craig. Do you have any ongoing work to ensure that American racehorses have a life after their racing career is over? Craig.
Yeah, that's a problem that has been addressed somewhat locally for the most part over the last 15 years. The Stronach Group, the organization I work for, actually has placement personnel at each one of our racetracks. So we work with owners and trainers to make sure that horses are rehomed, retrained in all of the jurisdictions we work in, as well as with the horsemen's organizations in those states. There are national programs. Here in California, there's an organization called Karma that works to place horses over the long haul. We certainly have monitoring groups that are looking for horses that might be subject to export to Mexico or Canada for consumption, which we are significantly opposed to. There's legislation pending in Congress to eliminate that. It's been illegal to transport a horse to slaughter in California most of the entirety of my career in this business, but that's an ongoing challenge, and I think it's probably one that we don't have our arms fully around in terms of really knowing what happens to each and every horse that is on the racetrack. In my view, that starts with the owner of that horse. When any of us undertakes the responsibility for an animal, whether they're an animal with commercial uses or not, we have a responsibility for that. And I think it starts with the owner, but certainly the overall industry needs to focus. That is not a subject matter that's part of the HISA remit. You can only bite off so much because there's still a lot for them to do and get their arms around. But I think perhaps down the road that could be a more effective national program run using those kinds of resources. But it's an ongoing issue. And again, I'm not sure we really know the extent of the situation.
Yes, yeah. Look, I certainly echo what you've said there, so far as the challenge that we face and the need to wrap our arms around it. Traceability, I know excellent work's been done on that in a number of jurisdictions, Australia. I know that the BHA under Brant Dunshe's leadership is doing some very significant work to advance the cause there, as far as traceability is concerned. It's an issue that we do need to advance. One question that I wanted to put to you, Peter, I mean, the whip, I suppose it's easy and obvious to someone who knows nothing about racing, and they switch on the television and they see it and they say, oh, someone's brandishing this crop and they're hitting the horse. So it's not really difficult to understand why to greater and lesser degrees that's seen as a welfare issue. But from your experience, particularly in Sweden and the Nordic countries, what are the other emerging welfare issues? What come in behind the whip in terms of 2, 3, 4, 5? And in your view, what's the scope for regulation to address those welfare issues?
I think it's two different aspects. If you're taking the handlers or the punters or our customers that are betting on horses, I think there are race fixing or match fixing or anti-doping is really, really high on the agenda. Or if you're talking about the public area or the society itself, I think they are more keen that, as we talk about now, life after racing, more how we take care of the horses through our, the whole life, so to speak. So, so it's a little different which one you talk to, or which one you addressed the question to, but for ATG customers, I think it's race fixing and anti-doping is high on the agenda, and for the society itself, I think it's how you take care of the horses for their lifetime.
And so if we just pause there and look at, say, race fixing, for example, I mean, that's seen as a sort of well, every punter would be concerned about it if I thought it was happening. But what's the extent to which the Swedish punter is terribly concerned that races are being fixed?
I don't think they are concerned that racing being fixed, but they see some horses doing remarkable races. They're doing,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, you can see they are starting in a speed that no one can imagine, and they keep that speed for the whole race. So then it's starting about, yeah, is this horse on medication or is this horse in, yeah. So I think that's for the punters. I think that's the highest one. Race fixing in itself, it's I think we are on board on that, and we have really good regulations, and we have good stewards, and we have a lot of controlling systems. So I think yeah, that there we are. I couldn't say we are perfect, but we are good. Yeah.
Well, one thing that struck me as very interesting that emerged from the comments that Craig and you've made, Peter, is what I'll put in these terms: the extent to which this is a question of regulation, and the extent to which these challenges have multi-pronged solutions. So, I mean, if we look to sort of the veterinary list, horses being examined pre-race, post-race, the controls on use of bute, these are regulatory issues. But then you spoke with a lot of passion about the new modalities of scanning and examining horses, Craig, and it seems to me that's at least as important in terms of you can regulate, but there'll be a point at which there might be one more thing we need to regulate, or we decide, you know, the most recent thing I think probably the International Federation's grappled with has been bisphosphonates, to say, well, you know, that's an area we haven't really focused on, but looking at the research, it probably isn't a good thing. And so we'll take the international agreement a step further in domestic rules. But other than those improvements at the margin, in terms of achieving better welfare outcomes and addressing that aspect of the community concern about the impact that racing has on the welfare of the horse, it's much more than regulation, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, horsemanship, I think, is probably the sort of first and foremost. I think in this country, it's certainly not the art that it was 40 or 50 years ago. You know, we no longer have agricultural communities and roots for many of our citizens. You know, we're urban, suburban communities now, and the number of people who've grown up around horses and have sort of that hands-on experience from the day they were born is diminished dramatically. But I think, you know, one thing that's encouraging and something we can work on both domestically and internationally, you know, Greg Ferraro, who is a renowned orthopedic surgeon, veterinary orthopedic surgeon, is also the chairman of the California Horse Racing Board, and he and I have discussed for many years the fact that racetracks and the racing environment is a giant laboratory. We essentially have a captive community, and I don't mean that in the negative sense. I mean that in the sort of descriptive sense that we have ready access to horses. We can design inquiries, particularly now that we have these advanced imaging modes, and we can begin to correlate incidences of injury, and by essentially taking advantage of the immense amount of data that we have around the world and observing what's going on. You know, I think I don't think we'll be able to eliminate catastrophic injury, because I mean, there's always just some sneaky thing that happens. But I would say, you know, as I said, at Santa Anita, we went from 42 in 19 to 9 in the current year. And I think that 9, you know, 4 of those, I believe, were shoulder injuries of, horses coming off a lengthy layoff, and with, serious data analysis and attention, I think we can get those numbers down to not 0, but certainly a level of that's minimal enough to avoid the constant concern that we have of existential risk. And I really do think we have to begin to look at this industry as a giant data dump and figure out how we can manage that, make sure that tracks around the world have access to this imaging equipment, and so we can correlate certain risk factors that from our own injury database that the Jockey Club maintains and work that Dr. Parkin's done. We know risk factors. Horses coming off a layoff are at much greater risk. Unstarted 4-year-olds. There's a wide range of things we know, and I think within, hopefully by the time I'm no longer an active participant in this business, we can get those numbers down to very low numbers, much lower than they are right now.
Yeah, look, I'm greatly encouraged to hear you say that. That's our philosophy as well at the Hong Kong Jockey Club, and that's the focus of our efforts. We think that's the next frontier, and it's the frontier that will make a material sort of further improvement to the welfare outcomes, and the post-racing lives of horses as well. Not just preventing the catastrophic injury, but to ensure that horses, when they finish their racing career, are in a state where they're more likely to be able to have a good second career, or at least a further life that's free of pain. Are there any other questions from the audience? I feel I'm monopolising things here, but I can't see questions on this. I'm just worried that somehow I'm filtering them. Are there questions that people want to put to our panelists?
I'm happy to go back to bed. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and Peter is really keen to get out of here and get started, sort of laying the wine and the food for glad midsummer. Yeah. So, but maybe I could just ask one more question to you, Craig, about the HISA regulations around the whip. I was interested to read that. And if I've got this wrong, that's the purpose of me putting it to you, see that it's corrected, and then to see what you see as the rationale. At the moment, if someone offends, say, the whip rule in California, I think their fines are of several thousands of dollars to the jockey. As I read the HISA rules, if it's a Category 2 or Category 3, and I may have the wrong terminology there, but if it's a higher grade of offence in terms of a crop rule violation, then there's the prospect of the owner's prize money being forfeited. Is that a correct sort of analysis of the new regulations? And what's the rationale? And it seems, if that is the case, it's a big step in terms of the change in the way this is treated, say, in California.
I would love to give you an answer to that one, Andrew, but I haven't read those regulations since we submitted our comments, 4 or 5 months ago. So I
very good.
Have a recollection of that. But that's been, what to do in the event of a violation in a major, event. If it's the Breeders' Cup Classic and somebody decides to take the liberty and, go for 5 more whacks. And take advantage, like how should it be treated? And it's been a subject of great debate. I'm not sure anybody has a great answer to that at this point. I do think it should be taken into account, and if it's purposeful and clear violation. But I don't know the answer to that one specifically.
No. Well, look, you're right. It's a thorny question. I know that in Australia, for example, there's the capacity for protests to be upheld on the basis of a breach of the rule. That the stewards can be comfortably satisfied that the the whip rule breach affected the outcome. Peter, what's the approach on that?
I'll say, we've had the same rule here in California not in terms of disqualifications perhaps, but and we've had a Breeders' Cup here last year at Del Mar. Kentucky now has similar rules, so the Kentucky Derby has been run under those rules. Now we haven't had finishes that perhaps were the stretch drive with two horses nose to nose in many of those races, but I think by and large the riders around the world are getting accustomed to it once they once they've been tapped a few times for a fine. I think they remember it, and I haven't seen situations where I thought anyone was. Now, do I watch every race? No, but particularly in a Breeders' Cup, that's the kind of place where you'd really worry somebody would take advantage just because the money is on the line, and we haven't seen much of that.
Good, thanks, Craig. Pete, did you? We've got about 3 questions now. I spoke too soon. They're coming in thick and fast. But did you have anything you wanted to add on that particular point in terms of how whip rule breaches are penalised in Sweden?
Yeah, we have. You can start with saying like the whip rule in Sweden have for the last 15 years, you can say, have been stricter and stricter for every year they have been gone. And for 2021 to 2022, they changed it from you're allowed to urge the horse or whip the horse a couple of times in the races for trotting, to move it down to you only get to flick the horse and communicate with the horse. And the thoroughbred on the gallop, they took it one step further and took away, or you were allowed to have the whip with you, but only use it if you're close to an accident or something like that, like a security tool. And in training in Sweden, you're allowed to use the whip, but you can say that we have a long term of history. You can say that we are very they don't use the whip as much as they used before. They have for every 5 or 10 years where they have moved forward, so they don't use the whip in training as much as they did before. So, but you're allowed to have the whip in training as well. Well,
presciently, you've answered half of a question that was put by Jacob Katz-Prozak. The second part of his question, first part was that point you've just made about the difference between use of the whip during a race and during horse training. But he also puts the question, and I'll quote him, and isn't it a little bit strange that in trotting races, however, you can use a whip and not in a speed race, a thoroughbred race? What do you say to that?
Yeah, that's Swedish gallop and Swedish trotting that didn't make up the rules. But I think they have the information that I got. It's really, really hard to see in the thoroughbred when you're using the whip or not, if you're using it on the neck or hitting the horse. So they said, okay, we're not going to have it's not going to be fair for the jockeys if the rules are not strict enough. So I think that was the main reason. And I think that in the sports totally, we have gone more and more to using the whip as a communication tool, you can say, compared to get the horse to moving forward.
Okay. Here's a question to both of you gentlemen then. And it comes from Mike Brewer, and he makes the observation that regardless of our own views on the use of the whip, is there not now a sense of inevitability that we're moving towards a sport where in future the whip will only be carried for the use of correction? You Peter, first.
Yeah, I think Mike is 100% correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay, short, to the point, and from your point of view, Craig?
Well, I think in this country, at least, I think riders will be permitted to carry a whip for safety purposes if the horse is out of control in some fashion. My own sense is that we're probably over the long haul going to be at some 5 or 6 strike limitation, not complete elimination. One thing I do think is useful to add, from the moment we shifted from, unlimited use to, and that there was a very distinct turnover date. I believe it was October 1st of 2020. There wasn't any change in wagering patterns, and for my money, of course, somebody who lost by a nose said they would have won by a nose, but the way I look at it, they were playing by the same rules. So, whether they could have won if they'd hit or not doesn't really matter much. And I think once everyone's gotten adjusted, so many times. I think it's an observation, and I say this from the perspective of experience now. So many changes we have tried to make that were resisted for years and years and years, that were positive, constructive things, were resisted for tradition. And the world was going to fall in. When we were eliminating steroids in California, that was going to be the end of our ability to fill races. And I mean, you could probably go through the list of 20 or 30 of those kind of things, and literally from the day the change took place to a week later, it was like nothing had happened. And we adapt, we improve, and the chicken little sky is falling approach to life hasn't really proved itself out.
Yes, yeah, indeed. I well remember when we at the International Federation first embarked on the discussion on major doping agents having no place whatsoever, and in particular anabolic steroids. That all those arguments came out, and yet major jurisdictions that include a large number of geldings population, who many said, well, we can't see the sport continuing without some access to anabolic steroids. Those jurisdictions signed on immediately, and there wasn't a blip. So you're right. A lot of these arguments fall away as soon as the thing's put to evidence. Now, Brant Dunshee puts a question to you, Peter. He wonders whether you could perhaps cover the ATG's project to assess welfare standards of commingling partners with those in Sweden in your overall commercial assessment, linking welfare to commercial decisions.
Yeah, to make it short then, first of all, we try to have like a protocol that we're looking for the horse welfare and integrity. So all partners, you can say, we take in consideration if the partner have good integrity and good health fare, then we take in the partner as a commingling partner and offer the races to our customers. But
busy.
No, someone else is talking. Yeah, but it's really important to our customers that we are. You can say on the same level that the society itself, or if we're not that, we're 1 or 2 steps ahead. So it's really important that we offer horse racing that are good for them, and they think is compliant to their experience and how they want to have the horse welfare for they're gonna bet on it. So if we don't have that, they're not gonna bet. So you can say like it's the win-win situation. If we have a good protocol and we have a good horse welfare, they're gonna like it and they're gonna bet on it, and we're gonna earn some money, and we're gonna put the money back to our owners. There is our Swedish trotting and Swedish gallop. So that's the way it works.
Very good. Thank you, Pete. Well, I think we've come to a point in the proceedings where it's my job to thank you, Peter, and you, Craig, for your contributions to this webinar, and to thank I think at our height we've got 28 participants. We've dropped to 21. No reflection on you, Craig. No reflection on you, Peter. I take the responsibility for it. But thank you to our participants, and thank you, Florence, for your agency in organising this discussion. I think it's been an interesting one. So thanks, everyone, and I'll bid you all a good morning, a good afternoon, or good night. And a
Thank you.
glad midsummer